Well, here we are again. This is episode 3 in this epic drama of the story of God, finding our place in His story. God creates an ordered and a potentially flourishing cosmos, and He gives His royal image bearers the vocation of partnering with Him and moving His creation forward. It all goes wrong in chapter 3, when the woman and the man, deceived by the serpent, saw and took, rebelling against God and His wisdom, His definition of what is good and what is bad. Relationships were broken. Humans and God, humans in themselves, humans among themselves, and humans in creation. Everything is broken. The serpent and the cosmos were cursed. And humanity was exiled from the source of life and peace and security. And now the new normal was going to be to build a world, but on violence, exploitation, and greed. The clenched fist way, the seeing and taking way. This is human wisdom. And humans have given themselves over to serving the creature rather than the Creator when they rebelled against God. But in chapter 3, there's a glimmer of hope, because in this chapter, verse 15, he says, "But speaking to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And in the end, he will crush your head, you will strike his heel." So there is a conclusion coming to all of this. Evil, at some point, in some way, will be dealt with at its source. So how we understand the problem that has been generated in chapter 3, the severity of the problem will shape how we understand what the solution is. We said last week that the rebellion of the human couple was much worse than simply a falling from grace. Because in their rebellion, in their rejection of God and His wisdom, of doing it His way, and partnering with Him and fulfilling their vocation of building a world, they have unleashed a threatening power, a power that pervades, that is invasive, that corrupts, not just in their own lives, but in the cosmos itself, in the very fabric of creation. And we find ourselves exiled from God's presence, and because of that, unable to fulfill God's original intention for humans in building a world. So it's not just that sin needs eradicating out of our lives, and it does. It's sin, and it's the power that goes along with sin, death, chaos, needs defeated forever. It needs defeated forever, full stop. So as we move from the first pivotal section of Genesis, with the emergence of the nations, we notice that the nations continue to go their own way. They adopt the human wisdom of seeing and taking, and it creates a tension between the nations and God, the goodness of God, the generosity of God. And this tension between God and the nations, it actually it develops the plot conflict of the story of the Bible. And so God's response to this is to set in motion a plan, a rescue operation. God's intention is to rescue and to restore divine blessing to the whole world. God does not give up. God launches a rescue operation. And to do this, to launch this rescue operation, to rescue His creation from what has happened, God will choose. He will make a choice. He will choose a person, and in that person He will choose a family, and that family He'll choose a nation. He will choose one family from among the family of nations. And in his book, The Day the Revolution Began, reconsidering the meaning of Jesus' crucifixion, N.T. Wright says this. He says, the larger biblical narrative, or the larger biblical story, indicated that the fate of humanity as a whole was hanging upon the rescue operation that had been launched in the family of Abraham. So God chooses Abraham out of everyone in the world. He chooses Abraham. And he chooses the descendants that come out of Abraham, his family, which will become a nation, Israel. He chooses him to restore divine blessing to the world and to get his creation project back on track. So we're in the third episode today in this great epic, God's creation project, and then failure, and then now God's choice people. Choice people. And so in choosing this family, God is giving this nation an opportunity to make the right choice, unlike their forebears, their ancestors in the garden. And if they make the right choice, it will open up a new way forward for the rest of humanity, for the rest of us. It all hinges on this people. And so this is so hopeful. But we know the story. We know how the story goes. We know that this nation too gives into the same deceptive story of the serpent. You will not die. You will not die. So, it's the same song, second verse. And so the story of God and Israel becomes the first major subplot of the Bible. Humanity is moving away from God, but God chooses. God makes the choice. God takes the initiative. God steps in and he chooses a person. He chooses a person living in the East, from someone from one of the oldest civilizations that ever existed, the Sumerian civilization, way over in the East. And so God chooses Abraham and he calls him and he says, go. And later, God makes a covenant with Abraham to bring him into a land where in this land he will become a nation, or his descendants will become a nation. And this nation, God's intention was to bring his blessing to the world, his creational, fruitful, flourishing blessing to the world. Well, this family ends up in Egypt where they grow into a multitude and they become enslaved in Egypt. And Egypt embodies all that has gone wrong in our world, all that has gone wrong with humanity. Idolatry, enslavement, dehumanizing culture, it has given into evil. So it appears that the story ends in slavery in Egypt. But God raises up Moses. God defeats the Egyptians and the dark power behind Egypt. And he rescues his people against all odds, bringing them out of slavery. He enters into a covenant with them, and he chooses them to be his partners because he chose Abraham, their forefather. And he says, if you will obey my covenant, you will be a priestly kingdom. We've seen those words before. Back in the garden, royal priesthood, royal image bearers. You will be a priestly kingdom. And you will be the ones I will use to rescue the nations. God's creation project, now his rescue operation, it moves forward in this people. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. We're going to go back to Abraham. We're going to be in chapter 12 of Genesis in just a bit. But in choosing Abraham, God is choosing the people that will come from him. He is choosing Israel. And it's Israel that will be the people through whom God will rescue the world. That was his intention. Israel is the people God will use to bring his redemptive and his creational blessings to the whole world. And so there's a couple of things we want to say this morning and talk about and think about. Well, what is so significant about being chosen by God? What is so special about God choosing, making a choice? Well, God chose Abraham to be a blessing to the nations. We'll read that in just a moment. This is Abraham's vocation. We've been talking about vocation. This is his vocation. It's not unlike the original vocation back in the garden. Because in choosing Abraham, it's not because God just likes the looks of Abraham or he likes Abraham. Abraham's a cool dude. No, he chooses Abraham because he It's through Abraham and his descendants that he will bring blessing. So it's a vocation. The calling is a vocation. Abraham is like a new Adam, and the descendants that come out of him are like to be the new humanity. God is starting again. So we're thinking and we're sitting there thinking, well, so what? What is that to us? How does God choosing Abraham and his descendants, how does that relate to us in our life and the story of the Bible? And we're not even Jews. We'll talk about God's and how he intends his people to be the means through which the nations are blessed. God always intends for his people, whoever his people are, to bring blessing to the world. And today we're his people. And the vocation's the same, to bring blessing to the world. Because blessing leads to a state of flourishing. You know, that word flourishing, I don't know if there's a better word, but it covers a lot. It's a good word, flourishing. When we think of flourishing, we think of something that's life-giving, life-affirming, something that is good and right and meaningful and flourishing. Yes, so blessing leads to flourishing, a state of flourishing. Life and security and purpose and righteousness and peace and harmony and health and wholeness, all of these things. That's our vocation as God's people. You know, we are constantly faced with choices every day, every single day. When we get up in the morning and go into the kitchen, we are faced with a choice. Do I have an egg and toast this morning, or do I have cereal? We probably don't give much thinking about that. For me, it's no choice. I get up in the morning, it's an egg and toast. I don't even think about anything else. But some choices are more significant. You know, we're sick. Do I go to the doctor? Or I just ride this out? What do I do? Well, there's a lot of factors probably goes into how we decide on that choice. But that's a more significant choice than to decide what we're going to eat for breakfast. And then some choices are life-changing. Many of you maybe saw on Facebook this week, March the 7th is a significant date for Mary and I because it's the date that we arrived in New Zealand 45 years ago. When she said that, I thought, whoa, 45 years. Yeah. And so, I remember, making the choice. Going to New Zealand to fulfill my aim time. And it was a life-changing choice. Because up to that point, my imagination was to do something else with my life, and I thought, well, just do this, and life-changing. What a great blessing for myself, for Mary, and for our family, and yeah. So some choices we make, and what we choose at the moment doesn't seem so significant, but then it becomes hugely significant. So all choices have consequences, and of course, the more significant the choice, the more important the consequence, or the far-reaching the consequence. And others make choices that affect us. It's not just that we make a choice and it affects us, but others make a choice and that affects us as well. And most of us have had experience as children of playing games, and you have two teams and you have two captains and they choose. You're sure they're thinking, choose me, and maybe they choose you first. That makes you feel how? Good, yes, because I'm good, I remember when I was growing up playing football, American football, gridiron football, and friends and I would play games and play football, and I remember several times I was chosen, I don't know about first, but close to the first, felt pretty good, but I can remember several times everyone's chosen, I'm the lone one. Okay, I choose you. But if you're the last one, there's no choice, and it makes you feel horrible, but yeah. So other people's choices do affect us. I was woken up, this is a long time ago, this is when we were living in Michigan. It was 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and one of our members in the congregation, Terry Adams, called, and she was all upset. And she's told me that her sister just got the news a short time ago that her husband had been killed in a car accident, killed by a drunk driver. The drunk driver and her husband, early in the morning, I think he was coming back from a fishing trip. They met at the same time at an intersection. The drunk driver had a stop sign. He didn't see it, went through and hit him and killed him. So that drunk driver made a choice. He chose to drink, and he chose to drink again and again until he got drunk, and he made another choice to get in the car and drive. That was his choice, but he probably did not intend to kill anybody, but he did. So his choice affected her, and he was a young father with a young family. So yeah, other people's choices can affect us drastically. Choices do matter. We just started watching on Wednesday night, last week at David Liv's house, this series that many of you have seen, and I think John's group is watching it too, called The Chosen. It's a very interesting title. I'm kind of curious to see how they bring that into the story here, this idea of The Chosen. The whole series is called The Chosen. I don't know if you've thought about that, why they call it The Chosen. The Chosen, yeah. Well, Jesus is the chosen one, but God's people are chosen by God. God makes a choice as well. Well, the story of God, it continues. And in our story today, in chapter 12, it opens up in Sumer. That's where Abraham is. He's in Sumer. Sumer is an ancient civilization that blossomed some 1,000 years before the time of Abraham. In the time of Abraham, it was on the decline. And one of the major cities in the civilization of Sumer was Ur. And it was once a magnificent, powerful city, but now it was on the decline as well. In fact, things had been and were continuing to change in the world around Abraham and the world of Abraham. Peoples were migrating from one place to the next. Ancient civilizations were coming down and new civilizations were arising. It was a time of change, and people were migrating for various reasons, usually related to their survival. And so God, in that context, God says to Abraham, go, leave your family, leave your place, leave your country, your life, your own life behind, and go. And Abraham obeyed. God made a choice, but then Abraham made a choice too. He chose to obey. He chose to obey. And Abraham's migration will be the most important migration the world has ever seen. We don't think about it that much, but his migration out of Ur in and of itself was maybe insignificant. He's just one family among thousands of other peoples who were moving around in that part of the world. But his migration will become the most significant migration the world has ever had. And so up to this point in the biblical story, people have been moving east. That's east from my direction, yeah. They've been moving east. Adam and Eve, when they were exiled out of the garden, the Bible says they went east. And that signifies away from the presence of God when you move east. And Cain, a little bit later, next chapter, was exiled east. That was away from the presence of God. Sorry, I'm reverting the other way. Forget about directions right now, okay? And the builders of Babel, they migrated east because they wanted to make a name for themselves. And now in the east, in the area of Babel, in Ur, God says, go west. Go west to the land that I will show you. So if east in the Bible signifies moving away from the presence of God, then going the other way signifies moving toward the presence of God. So now we have in the story, we have a movement back toward God. So we come to Genesis chapter 12. I said we're going to be in Genesis chapter 12, and 1 through 3. And this is one of the key texts in the Bible. All right? I know the favorite text is John 3:16, but in the story of the Bible, it's not a key text. It's an important text, as every text is important, I know. Here is the key text, because this helps us see the shape of the story and where the story goes and all of that. So in verse 1, now the Lord said to Abram, it says Abram because later his name changed to Abraham. I think I'll just say Abraham. The Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. And then in verse 7 he says, and this is after he arrived in the land, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So Abraham worshiped God there. So here is a pivotal text. Here is a hinge text that ties chapters 1 through 11 of Genesis with chapters 12 through 50. Ties these two parts of Genesis together because these are two distinct parts of Genesis. And so Abraham's call is the turning point. It's the pivot. It's the turning point in the story. And the focus up to this point has been on the bigger picture, God creating a cosmos and peoples emerging and floods and all of this. And now it telescopes down and focuses on one family. Because the rest of Genesis is about Abraham and then about Isaac and Jacob and his sons. It just telescopes down to this one family. But there's still stuff happening all around, of course. And so now the downward spiral of humanity from chapters 1 through 11, that's resulted in cursing. And by the way, cursing is found, or curse is found 5 times in chapters 1 through 11. And this exile from God's presence, moving east, moving east, moving east. Now humanity is, in the person of Abraham, is moving the other way. So now the reverse is beginning to happen with God's promise to bless. And the word bless is used 5 times in these verses here. 5 times. So Abraham was like a new Adam. God's creation project will move forward through Adam and through his family. So God intends for Abraham and his family to be the model for what it means to be in the image of God and to bring his creation project back onto its right track. So God makes a promise to Abraham, and the key word here, 5 times, is the word bless, 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 blessing, blessed. And there is progression of thought through this text here. Abraham is blessed. Abraham's name is used as a blessing. Abraham's blessers are blessed. And all families find blessing in and through this person, Abraham. The nations cannot and will not be blessed except through Abraham. So Abraham and his descendants are the source, are to be the source of blessing for the nations. Another guy, Ian Provan, said this. He said, this one family stands at the center of God's intention to bless his creation. One family at the center of his intention to bless the creation. And if this family is cursed, this is at the same time an attack on God and God's plan for the world. Because if the world is only to be blessed through the family of Abraham, then if you curse Abraham, then you're cutting off your only opportunity to be blessed, to experience God's flourishing that he intends for all people to experience. In chapter 22, verse 18, after Abraham, in his mind, offers up Isaac as a sacrifice, God, of course, prevents him. He says, in verse 18, he says, nations gain blessing for themselves because you have obeyed my voice. Nations gain blessing for themselves because you, Abraham, have obeyed my voice. So what is this blessing that surrounds God's promises to Abraham? What is this blessing? Well, God's promise to Abraham of blessing and fruitfulness continues the creational vocation of chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis. To be fruitful, to multiply. That is, if humans are his image, God's image, to multiply is to create more images to reflect God's wisdom, God's goodness into creation. It takes humanity multiplying to reflect God's wisdom, God's goodness, to help create creation to move toward uh, increasing flourishing, be fruitful and multiply. And so the word blessing here connects with God blessing in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis. So blessing implies flourishing. To bless is to extend the goodness of creation. To bless is to bring about a state of flourishing, whatever form that flourishing takes. Children, prosperity, peace, security, unity, harmony, wholeness. So blessing is not just a prayer. It's not just a wish. It's not just words with good intentions. It's actions that result in blessing. It's not, just saying something isn't blessed, but it's doing something to bring about a state of blessing. And this word bless or blessing and blessed is a theme in the book of Genesis. You just read Genesis and it comes up over and over again. In Genesis, this word is found 78 times. I did count them. And it's, of course, this blessing or bless is a word common throughout the Old Testament. It's found hundreds of times in the Old Testament, the concentration in Deuteronomy and a concentration of the word in the Psalms. So God's mandate to humans to bring flourishing into the world is now carried forward through this one family. God wants to bring blessing to all the nations through Abraham and the family that comes from Abraham. It begins with his migration toward the land of promise, which is a migration toward God, the presence of God. So the future of the world is in the hands of Abraham. And we're thinking, what? Abraham? That scoundrel? That man that just right after this, he gets into Canaan and he goes to Egypt, he throws his wife under the bus? That man? Yeah. And then his son, Isaac and Jacob, that's a scoundrel of scoundrels. So these people, yes, these dysfunctional, lying, deceitful, faithless, fickle, and grumbling people, God, are you sure you want to choose these people? God says, yep. We know God knows. Because we know Abraham and Isaac and Jacob could act as scoundrels. They acted faithlessly. And they were dysfunctional. You read their accounts in Genesis. But God made a promise. God made a choice that the whole world will be blessed through this family. And God was committed to this family because he chose them. He made a covenant with them. And God keeps his word. So God, he has his work cut out for him now. Because we know the story of Israel, and we'll come talking about that in the future. Because they prove over and over again to be faithless. And so how can God be faithful to a people and that is so faithless? God makes himself vulnerable in doing this, but that's our God. This creational blessing that brings flourishing will come to the nations through them. Yes, and also through us. So what does this mean to us? We're going to have to skip a part of the story and how it develops to bring us into the picture here, because we are part of the picture. Paul writes in Galatian letter in chapter 3 and verse 6, he says, just as Abraham believed God, it was reckoned to him as righteousness, as faithfulness. So you see, those who believe are descendants of Abraham. Do you believe? Talking about believing Jesus. You're a descendant of Abraham. You are a descendant. You are this family. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, declared the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, all the Gentiles shall be blessed in you. And that's an allusion to Genesis chapter 12, the text we just read. So for this reason, those who believe are blessed with Abraham who believed. And then in verse 14, in order that In Christ Jesus, the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles so that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Well, there's an argument he's making there, but the point I want to bring out from that is that if we believe in Jesus, we are grafted in, if you will, into the family. So this is our story. So this is our ancestor, Abraham. So we're part of this. So God is speaking to us, and God will bless the world through his family, and we're God's family. And so we're actually God's renewed family, renewed people. And now God is using his renewed people to be the means to extend his blessing to all the nations. This is our vocation as God's people. And it's connected to God's original intention and his original project in creation in the beginning. So this is not something new or different that's come about. God has not given up on his creation project, and now he has a different one with a different agenda and a different story. No, it's all part of the same story. God always intended his people and expected his people to extend his goodness into creation by reflecting his wisdom into the world. By getting about the task of building a flourishing world, a world filled with his presence, his life, his love, his goodness, wholeness, and harmony and peace, and not just for individuals, but in families and communities and, yes, nations. So how do we bless? How do we bless? We bless by extending God's power and bringing his life and healing into this painful, suffering, and confused world. We are God's people, and he uses us. Yes, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all that, we're dysfunctional too. We're still broken in some ways, but yet God wants to use us to extend and to bring his blessing to the world, to this hurtful world. So how do we bless? Luke chapter 6, verse 28, Jesus says, "Bless those who curse you." Is that God calling or something? Abraham. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Romans 12, verse 14, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. 1 Peter 3, verse 9, do not repay evil for evil or abuse for abuse, but on the contrary, repay with a blessing. It is for this that you were called, that you might inherit a blessing. In James chapter 3, verse 9 and 10, James writes, with it, he's talking about the tongue, with it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes blessing and cursing. Notice in these verses we have blessing or cursing. These are words that go all the way back to the beginnings of Genesis, blessing or cursing. We bless, not curse, and so they're put in contrast to one another. We're either blessing or cursing in our life, one of the two. The choices that we make in our life fall in one or two categories, bless or curse. It's going to depend. Are we facing the world with a clenched fist, curse, or an open palm, bless? See, to bless is to do something that brings flourishing, a state of flourishing to the life of a person or a community or a nation or the nations of the world. To bless is to do something, is to take action in word or deed. I was talking with David Steele. He's walked out. He must know I'm talking about him here, so he walked out. He just had surgery. He's recovering from surgery. And I was talking with him a couple of days ago, and he said that, the church has brought over some frozen meals to help them while he recovers from surgery. Now, you may not have known the church has done that, but the church did this. There's some individuals within the congregation that did this, but the church did this. This is blessing. This is an example of blessing, because this action results in a state of flourishing. They don't go hungry, or not that they would go hungry, but it's not just a flourishing in the sense of physical flourishing, that they actually have their bodies filled with nourishing food, because I'm sure it's a nourishing meal. But the action results in flourishing, not just physically, but also refreshes relationships in our community. It adds to the bonds of love and generosity in our community, and that results in a state of flourishing. That's blessing. That's extending God's original creational blessing into the world. That's just one story. We can multiply these kinds of stories. So we have a choice to bless or to curse, the same as Adam and Eve did. And each one has consequences. One brings life and the other brings death. So choose to bless and be part of the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. So who am I? Who are we? We are God's royal, priestly image bearers. When you get up in the morning and look in the mirror, that's what you tell yourself. So what's the problem, though? The problem is rebellion, which resulted in cursing, unleashing sin, death, chaos into the world. And now humans are unable to fully fulfill their vocation. In other words, we're not really able to be true humans. So what's the solution? God choosing Abraham. That's the solution. Choosing Abraham. Choosing Abraham's descendants and the nation that emerges out of him, this one family. They are the solution. But they don't look like a solution. Only more of the same problem. So what happens next then? Because we're going to talk about Israel as a priestly royal image bearer. We'll talk about their failure and how God moves around this and through this and what that means to us. So, we've looked into the mirror to remind ourselves of our identity. Who am I? Don't forget that. Don't forget that. In the very beginning, when the story gets going, God made us in His image. We are image bearers. We are royal image bearers. We need to tell ourselves that. And we are encouraged to face the world as we go out with an open palm, not seeing and taking, but an open palm. And that's the gesture of giving, giving, giving. So what about blessing? As Abraham's children, we are to bless. That's our vocation. We're to bless. What's the gesture of blessing? I thought about this. Open palm, but something in our palm that makes someone's life or a family's life or a community's life a life of flourishing. That could be a meal. That can be love. That can be a word of encouragement. That can be a shoulder to cry on. That can be advocating for justice in a situation of injustice. That can put yourself on the line for the sake of the other. That could be a million things, but it brings flourishing, a state of flourishing into the world. And these things we do are not just momentary things that are forgotten in the dustbin of history, because one day God will use these things in building His world. All right, His world that's coming. So these are not just going to be forgotten things. These things are important. So blessing, yes, we face the world with open palm, but to bless the world, we offer something that brings flourishing in their life. That's the gesture of blessing, an open palm with the gift of life to others. So, brothers and sisters, bless and do not curse. God bless you.